Hello folks, this is Irv Shapiro of the Dr. Vex channel. COVID is still with us. You can tell by the fact that I badly need a haircut. But in spite of COVID still being with us, time progresses. And we're now approaching school season. Many of our children and grandchildren may already be back in school, either via Zoom or in person. And the holidays are just around the corner. In my tradition, the holidays start this coming weekend with the New Year and the Day of Atonement. Then we have Thanksgiving coming, we have Christmas, we have Hanukkah, we have holidays from many of the world religions. And one of the best things to do around holiday time are to bake cookies. Everyone loves cookies, and everyone loves cookies even more when you shape them like dinosaurs or Christmas trees, or in my case, like apples. So I've made a number of videos over the last couple years about producing cookie cutters on 3D printers. Well, I think I really have the best possible way down now with the fewest steps and the most flexibility. So stay tuned and let's learn something together. Now let's start, before we talk about technique, talking about food safety. I print my cookie cutters from PLA. PLA is a biodegradable material, often made from corn. And the question is it safe to use with food? Well, using something with food is a continuum. Is it safe to touch food with it? Is it safe to store food with it? Is it safe to cook food with it? So I treat PLA the same way I treat wood. I have wooden spoons, I have wooden cutting boards, I have wooden salad bowls. Now, PLA produced from a 3D printer has very small holes in it. You can't necessarily see them, but they're potentially holes between the layers. Think of one bead sitting on top of another bead. There are little spaces there. And those spaces could capture bacteria. So just as with wood, I wash my PLA utensils thoroughly. I don't use it for long-term storage of food. I'm pressing a cookie out of a sheet of dough, and I don't cook with them. So I'm very, very comfortable, and I'm not a professional. I'm not a food scientist. I'm not a material scientist, but I'm pretty comfortable using a clean cookie cutter to press some dough that's then going to go into a hot oven in order to bake. Now, in order to make a cookie cutter, you need two steps. You need a shape, and then you need to extrude it or give it depth. We're going to use Boxy-SVG to create our shapes. Boxy-SVG is a very inexpensive program. You can try it out for free. It's $9 if you want to buy it forever and install it on your Windows, your Mac, your Chromebook. It is more expensive if you want to use the cloud version and store everything in the cloud. I just use it locally for $10. And it produces SVG, Scalable Vector Graphic Files, which are the format of files that TinkerCAD can import. So TinkerCAD is another free program. It's a free computer-aided design program. And I'm going to show you something about TinkerCAD that will give us the idea, the basis for how we're going to create cookie cutters in Boxy that will properly import into TinkerCAD. So let's go to the computer and look at TinkerCAD for a moment. When you open up the TinkerCAD screen and you sign in, you have the option to create a new design. Now, I've produced a whole bunch. There are lots of videos on TinkerCAD. There are more than half a dozen in my channel. In fact, there are other ones about Boxy-SVG and TinkerCAD in the channel. So I'm only going to cover the basics you need for making cookie cutters today. Please go back to the channel and look for the other videos to learn even more. So I'm going to create a new design by clicking on Create New Design. And then I want to show you a basic principle. So I'm going to drag a box onto my work plane. I'm going to grab a corner and make it a little bigger. Now, there are two types of objects in TinkerCAD. Those of you familiar with it already know this. There are solids and holes. You use holes to cut shapes out of a solid. So if I take and drag another box here, and let's make the box a little higher by dragging on that corner, and a little bigger, and then I position it in this box. And then I combine those two shapes together. I selected them both by dragging around them, and I'm going to click this icon to group. You will see we've now cut a hole in my box. So there are two shapes there. This is going to be very important. When you import an SVG file into TinkerCAD, the first shape creates a solid. The next shape you import creates a hole, then a solid, then a hole. And there's a whole video on the channel about this principle. For our purposes today, we're going to create one solid and one hole. So two SVG objects, the type of objects we're creating are called paths. Now, just to give you some more information, I can use the scroll wheel on my mouse to scroll in or out. I can right-click and hold the Command or Control key, depending on your computer, and rotate. I can right-click and hold the Shift key to move that around. That's pretty much all we're going to need to know about TinkerCAD to do cookie cutters. Let me delete that. And now let's go to Boxy-SVG. Boxy-SVG is boxy-svg.com. And if you scroll down, you'll see all sorts of information about this program and the option to install it on a Mac or Windows or Linux or a Chromebook or to run it right off the web. So I followed the directions on the website to install it on my Mac, and I did license it for, what is the price here? $9.99 for $10. Well worth every penny. You'll use it repeatedly in order to generate SVGs that you'll use with various computer-aided design programs. So now let's leave the Boxy website. I'm going to click on my Boxy icon and open up Boxy-SVG. The first thing I'm going to do is File, New, and that's going to create a work area that I can draw in. There are a range of tools up and down the side and excellent tutorials right on the Boxy website about how to use those tools. I'm only going to use a couple very simple tools for what we're going to do today. On the right side are more advanced functions, such as filling your object or stroking it, putting an outline. And we're going to go down here to Library. Click on Library. Click on the last icon, which says Vectors. Now, this connects Boxy-SVG to the internet to a library of free open source SVG files we can start with. In fact, you can load into Boxy-SVG any SVG file and treat it the same way we're going to treat it today. So I'm going to go down here and type in Apple into the search box, and we'll see a variety of apple diagrams. We'll select this apple. It looks nice, and I'm going to drag it into the work surface and then make it a little bigger. Now, one of the tools on the right-hand side is a tool that looks like a ruler, and that will tell you the size of your object. So my object is 182 by 185. Those sizes will translate to millimeters when you import into TinkerCAD. So if I import a 180 unit object into TinkerCAD, it'll become 180 millimeters. So I want this a little smaller. So I'm going to click on this, and if you click on it a second time, it will give you the option to manipulate this object. If you go back to the boxes being blue, it will scale it. I'm going to make it about 150 millimeters. Now, this object is too complex for a cookie cutter. What we want to end up with is just the outline. So how do we do that? Well, we look at the details of the object and we convert it into a single path. So I'm going to click on this link here that says object. We'll see our object, if I click on the triangle, has a number of different groups. So the first thing I want to do is I want to get rid of those groups. So let's try clicking on the topmost group and then go to arrangement. That's sort of the arrows, the two arrows there, and say ungroup. Go back to my object, and we'll see there are less groups here now. Arrangement, ungroup. We're getting a little better. So let's select this one here, arrangement, ungroup. And we're going to keep doing this until there are no groups. Arrangement, ungroup. So now we see we have a series of components of this apple that are paths. But we want this to be a single path, not separate paths, because remember, when we import this into TinkerCAD, the first path will be a solid. The second path will be a hole. If we import this like this into TinkerCAD, we're going to have an absolute mess. So I'm going to hold Shift and select all these paths, and then I'm going to go to the Shape tool, the triangle, right here, and I'm going to say Unite. So you'll notice this turned a single color because now if I look at our objects, we have one path, a single object. Okay, now that I have my object as a single path, can I just bring this into TinkerCAD? Well, let's see what will happen. I'm going to go to Export. I'm going to export my file. We'll call this Apple Solid. Save. Let's go to TinkerCAD and do an import. Choose my file. And we'll see if we can find this here. Open it up. And you'll see it'll be 500 by 500, but if I limit it to just the art, not the artboard, it'll be basically 150 by 150, a little bit off. Let's import this. Now, that doesn't look like a cookie cutter to me. And you might think that I could just duplicate this. I'll click on duplicate and hold Command and scale down a version and move it into the middle, but you'll see you can't really line these up when you do that. When you have complex shapes and you scale, you're not able to put one on top of the other and line it up. I don't really understand how that math works, but that's the way it is. What you need to do instead is take and draw another shape just inside the current shape, basically stroke inside of it. So this solid is not going to work. So let's go back to Boxy-SVG and think about how we would do that. So I have a single path here. If I take and I do a edit, duplicate, and now I go to my objects, we'll see we have two paths. So for the second object, I want to stroke it inside. How do I do that? Well, there's a function in Boxy-SVG to do exactly that. If I go here to Shapes, I go to Inset. Every time I click this, my object will be brought in by 1 unit. Remember, a unit is a millimeter. So if I want my cookie cutter to be 2 millimeters wide, then I click on this twice. Now, to show you what happens, I'm going to go to Fill. I'm going to change the color of the inside object. And now you can see we have the outside object and the inside object. If I look here, you'll see we still have just 2 paths. If I turn this path off, you'll see the red. If I turn this path off, you'll see the green. So now we are ready to export this object as an SVG, and we'll call this Apple Outline.svg, and we'll save it. And now let's go back to TinkerCAD. I'm going to import this into TinkerCAD. So I'm importing Apple Outline. Import. Once again, we're going to import just the art. And we should end up with an apple that's just an outline that's about 150 millimeters in size. So if I click on this and I go to a corner, we see the sizes are exactly what we expected. Now, the one thing I have to be very careful of here, we'll scroll out a little bit, is I have to make sure this touches here. Otherwise, my cookie is going to fall apart. Now, I can do that by drawing an extra line in Boxy-SVG, or I can take and I can put a base on that part of this cookie. So if I take a box and draw it in, drag it in here, we'll look at it from a top view, and I'll show you a trick that I really like. This icon right down here says switch to flat view. Orthographic view, that makes it easier to work on things like this. I can take, and we'll rotate this up, and I'm going to make this 1 millimeter deep. Then I'm going to rotate back down. I'm going to move this over here, but then I'm going to move it up so it's on the top, just overlapping the top. So that's going to make sure those pieces are held together. So we started with Boxy-SVG. We took a complex shape. We made it a single path. We duplicated the shape. We did an inset twice to get a 2 millimeter wide, smaller shape. We aligned the shapes properly, and then we put a little helper here to make sure these pieces are together. So now let me export this as an STL file. Export, STL. And now we can load it into a slicer. So I'm going to go to the download folder, which is where the file will be on my computer, and open it up. And there is our cookie cutter all ready to print. Now it's a little too big for this particular printer. This is the Monoprice Ultimate 2, which is exactly 150. So we're going to scale this down uniformly by 90%, just so it'll fit there. I'm going to slice it, and it tells me that in 54 minutes, I will have a cookie cutter. Now, in this particular version, I actually moved the stem down a little bit. I edited it before I simplified the path. So folks, it will take you some trial and error, but the procedure is really very simple. You select an SVG, you can select from the library, or you can do a file import in Boxy-SVG. You ungroup it all, then you unite it into a single path. You make sure everything's touching, then you duplicate it. You do an inset a couple times to create an inner version. You align it properly, and you save it as an SVG. Then you import that into TinkerCAD. You save it, export it as an STL file, and you are ready to print cookie cutters for the holidays. Folks, I hope this was helpful. I hope you learned something. I hope this new technique, I've tried lots of techniques over the years. This is the simplest. I hope this new technique helps you out. If it does, give me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, click on the bell so you're notified when I publish new videos. Have a great day, a wonderful upcoming school season, holiday season. Let's hope that COVID is behind us before too long. Thanks so much. Let's continue to learn things together.